Just before I get started, we are trying to connect with our relay, but that shouldn't interrupt us. The computer technicians are going to do that for us. You might hear a beep or a ding at some point, so just ignore that as we go forward. They're waiting to get into their room now. Okay, so there's a meeting in the room in Aurelia. They're waiting for them. So we're just going to start because we don't know how long that could take. Hopefully it will be within minutes, but if they miss the first couple of minutes, it could be half an hour, we don't know. So I think it's best to get started. My name is Patrick Kane. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Professor Kareem Bengura. We're very privileged to have him today. He's a remarkable scholar. He's prolific in a number of ways. He holds 5 PhDs, which is hard to imagine. He speaks a number of different languages. If my memory is correct, let me check my notes. About a dozen African languages and about half a dozen European languages. In addition to that, he's written, if you can believe this, 70 books and over 600 articles. And I'm not going to read them all to you. Typically, I might give the list. But by the time I got done, you probably would have written another. So, just to give you a sampling of some of what he's written, a few of the book titles, to give you a sense of his great diversity and the areas he's covered. The Holy Quran and Contemporary Issues in 2003. Islamic Peace Paradigms in 2005. Assessing George W. Bush's Africa Policy and Suggestions for Barack Obama and African Leaders, which I think he'll help update today. That was written in 2009. Ebonics is Good, 2010. And one of his more important books, African Mathematics, From Bones to Computers, which won the Cecil B. Curry Book Award in 2011. And recently, the most recent thing that I have, although who knows, Fractal Complexity in the Works of Major Black Thinkers, Volume 2, which I think is in press right now, so you can look for that when it comes out. So it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Bengura today, who's speaking on the War on Terror in the African Theater. There'll be a discussion of Bush, Obama, and the U.S.-Africa policy.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's interesting. My wonderful brother, Zubaru, I sent him a title, and in his flyer I changed the title a little bit. So I wrote the actual title that he changed from. I understand why he was doing it. He was trying to protect me to make sure when I'm done there, they still allow me to enter the U.S. Just so that we have more time to talk a little bit, have a dialogue, I will try not to belabor some of the sections. And what I try to do when I make presentations is to write a paper. Better do that, still write a paper so that you get questions, you get feedback, you get discussion, something you improve it, something you can submit to somebody to look at, and who knows, it might end up in somebody's job. So I do have the paper, and anybody who's interested, just send me an email. I shall be very happy to email it to you in case some of the things are not dealt with in detail. So I will introduce, I will talk about theories of war, architects of the Bush administration war on terrorism in Africa, their philosophy, Bush administration's African allies in the war of terrorism, the Obama administration parlaying and exacerbating the war on terror in Africa, implications for African natural resources, an alternative strategy for the Barack Obama administration, and then draw some conclusions. Well, of course, one of the major components of George W. Bush's administration's Africa policy after the heinous, terrible terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. on September 11, 2001. was aimed at mobilizing friends and allies in its war on terrorism. Under the avowed aim of pursuing a global war on terrorism, the Bush administration sought to build an international coalition of the willing against the main enemy, which has taken the form of radical Islamic groups, exemplified by Al-Qaeda, and in a scenario taken right out of Samuel Huntington's great book, Clash of Civilization, the Bush administration made it very clear that the new enemy of the United States and its Western allies in the post-Cold War era was no longer a defeated communism, but rather other cultures, civilizations, and religions which threatened Western/Christian way of life. So what did he do? Immediately in 2007, the Bush administration gave us the now famous or infamous AFRICOM, a United States Military Command in Africa. AFRICOM's main mission is to track down and crush the growing terrorist hotspots in the vast, neglected regions with large Muslim populations from the Horn of Africa all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. The establishment of the command provides the United States with new bases from which to project force into the oil-producing Middle Eastern states. And the misguided reliance on force was demonstrated by the disastrous results of the U.S. forcibly toppling the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia with the muscle of the Ethiopian military. Similar to what happened in Iraq, the military victory over the ICU in January 2007 was swift, but the plan to install a client regime quickly went crazy, and a fierce insurgency ensued. And as you can see, Bush, I don't know if you see the circle in red. This is him looking at the war front with what? The cover of the binoculars was still on. What the hell was he looking at? And then, as if President Barack Obama did not learn anything from Bush's mistakes, now he's going to be the empire man. He's going to make amends to all the mistakes Bush made. He is going to get Osama bin Laden. He's going to put boots on the ground. Doesn't matter how many boots stayed in the ground, but he's going to do what we call the surge. And what happened? Not only has he carried on Bush's policy, but has even exacerbated those policies in the African theater. Interestingly, Obama won the Nobel Prize even before he started work. Some of us were a little bit worried about that. How can you give a man a prize? He hasn't even done a day's work in office. Maybe the Nobel Prize Committee is now kicking itself in the shins. I hope so. So now in Washington, we call Obama Bush on steroids because of the way he has padded and exacerbated the war on terror, which now he calls conveniently overseas contingency operation. But we, like the media and the politicians, we refuse to accept this new label and still call it the war on terror. And recently, he had added a sixth war, and that is the war in Mali and Niger. So while he assumed why he took 2 wars from Bush, Afghanistan and Iraq, he had added 6 more wars to those wars already. So now we have Pakistan, we have Yemen, we had the war in Somalia, which is now a real war that we are involved with, no longer the Ethiopian. Matter of fact, the new Ethiopian president is telling he's pulling out, and now we are worried. And then he has the Niger and Mali war, in addition to what happened in Libya. So here is a brother that some of us voted for because he had promised to change course, take a new direction. So we liberals, we are very happy to have somebody speaking a new language. It's going to get us out of Iraq. What is the real Iraq drawdown? take out 300,000 something, but you still have all these private security forces that took the places of US military, and then the military is sitting there right there in Kuwait for any intervention that becomes necessary. And what is interesting is that now he developed a secret list. He becomes the only determiner who should be added on the list and who should be eliminated when he makes the call. And interestingly, that list also includes even United States citizens. Now all of a sudden, people want to make noise when they have already gone home. In the 8 years that Bush prosecuted the war in Afghanistan, he used drones only 48 times. The first year that Brother Obama came to office, he had used drones 6 times more than that. In its essence, the Bush administration policy, as we saw it in Africa, was, and the Obama administration piling and exacerbating the policy is merely a continuation of the age-old imperial strategy of divide and emperor, divide and rule. Initiated at the end of the 19th century by the British imperialists rose and pursued during the colonial era by various European powers, notably Britain and France. So the argument I'm going to make today is that a confrontational and reckless foreign policy that privileges conflict and war over cooperation and diplomacy will actually inflame regional conflicts and spur more terrorism. It is this country's policies towards the use of force. Thus, the major objectives are twofold. Determine which of the leading contemporary theories of war realize self-defense, non-violent, pacifist, and just war theory best explains the Bush and Obama administration war on terrorism and the attendant consequences, and then suggests an alternative strategy that I believe Obama can pursue. The great Professor Edward Kesey tells us that diplomatic history of the U.S., or perhaps the history of American foreign relations in the African theater of diplomacy, there have been far too many cases of American co-optation of African surrogates and proxies for the advancement of Washington's foreign policy and security aspirations. And there have been far too many Africans and their leaders eager to carry out Washington's odious purposes. Examples abound in not too distant past. Angola, Somalia, South Africa, Mobutu, Zaire, etc., etc., etc. That may seem to some to have disdain for history of the Cold War. And what was weird was Zenawi, Mele Zenawi of Ethiopia. Mele Zenawi killed more people than Gaddafi did, more people than Mobutu did in Israel, more people than Mugabe is doing in Zimbabwe. But because he was our ally, we can use him to prosecute him on the Somalia. We never questioned, we never brought him to bear. But as God has his own ways, he took away Zimbabwe before a very bloody civil war erupted in that great country of Ethiopia right on time. So why this selective amnesia? Why do we go after those that do not support our point of view, or why do we let other dictators get away scotch-free? A country like Ethiopia that was championed internationalization of human rights and the humanization of international law should retain some modicum of its moral identity. Because Zenawi himself was tortured under Mengistu Haile Mariam. And we found him holding the end of the chain of the torture of those folks that were labeled Al-Qaeda. And to this day, we still have not seen one evidence of Al-Qaeda in Somalia. We are still waiting. And within that craziness, we saw women. A woman that was 6 months pregnant, tortured to death, slowly out of this universe. We saw people who were ill, that all he got to do is just say, they're Al-Qaeda. So people began to take old grudges against neighbors by labeling people what they think they want so that they can be targeted for elimination. There is on war. War as a concept, as you already know, is loaded with a lot of linguistic and cultural symbolism. When you are mighty and you are right, it's self-defense. When you are the weak, you are engaging in war. You are engaging in terrorism. Should we then redefine what war is, what terrorism is? What about state-sponsored terrorism? Why is it just bad when organizations or individuals involved, but when states involved in terrorism, we have a blind eye? Regardless of your socio-political economic perspective, there are three common types of war. The first type is the war of attrition. Usually bloody and can only be measured in terms of ground forces. The second kind is the war of maneuver. It's different from the war of attrition. While attrition, you fight to destroy the enemy's means to fight. War of maneuver is fought to destroy the enemy's ability or will to fight. The third is the war of revolution. Very bloody, and there are no front lines or completely transparent enemies. And last but not the least is the guerrilla warfare, where the enemy is elusive and hard to fight. It is one of the most difficult types of wars to fight, both economically and in terms of human losses suffered by both sides. So while the powerful can use their war of attrition and other wars of maneuver, the powerless will engage you into a guerrilla warfare. They may kill a whole lot. They might kill just a few, but you'll be in for a long fight. That is what the Afghans promised us, and that's what we are getting. The point that sooner or later we have to withdraw. How do we withdraw, and how do we make sure that what happened on September 11, 2001 never reoccurs? That is the question that challenges us, because we have shifted from that paradigm of engaging the enemy, of talking with the enemy. Now we are firmly entrenched to believe that if you do not negotiate with the enemy, don't talk to him. And we know no empire, no matter how strong you are, have ever been able to occupy Afghanistan and stay there forever. So sooner or later we also have to exit. So there are all these theories of war. The realists, I'm quite sure many of you are political science majors, you know what the realists say. Thomas Hobbes school, man by very nature is evil, life in the republic is what? Short, nasty, and British? No, brutish. And they are liberalists, self-defense. Yeah. So we'll skip those so that we don't spend too much time. The pacifist, and of course the just war theory. I will say something about the just war theory because that's what both administrations have used to justify their war on terror. The postulate is basically a Christian ideology which can be broken down into two categories, the theoretical justification and the historical justification. Theoretically, we learn from the great Holy Quran that just war theory aims to guide nations to act in the right manner during potential conflicts. Where did Quran get this? From the same Holy Bible. Where did the Holy Bible get this? From the Torah. So these three Abrahamic religions are not diverging at all in terms of what just theory of war is. Where is the divergence? Divergence comes in the historical justification. That is, theory deals with the past of a body rules of agreement applied while in the state of a conflict. Well, the other Abrahamic faith says what? Both Judaism and Islam are in accord in this. Those agreements should have already been in place, not after the fact. So what is it that we are not doing in our universe, in our world, to make sure that we have agreements that are acceptable to everyone, not just what we think should be superimposed on everybody else. That is the challenge of the 21st century. So who are the architects? Now I'm way ahead.
I'm way ahead of you.
Keep going, press. One more, okay, great. Oh, back. All right, good. These are architects of the great George Bush's war on terrorism in the African theater. Of course, to the left side, it's Elliot Abrams. This was the guy that we almost sent to prison for his illegal war activities and deals against the Contras, even selling arms, believe it or not, to Iran. And of course, you also the congressional hearings where we gave Iran a Bible, a pistol, and a cake. What the symbolism was, I still don't know. As long as we're able to get them to. And these are the same people that had no problem allowing North Korea, believe it or not, to sell arms to the Contras to fight against the Nicaraguan government. North Koreans, we scared of, we hate, we don't like them, people are troublemakers. And these are the people that began this idea of Africa. And there was so much in criminal activity, as I said, they almost put him in jail. But he was pardoned by George Bush Sr., but it never happened. And he even launched what they call the Trans-Sahel Counterterrorism Initiative. And then we had Shia. Shia, of course, as you know, was one of the architects for almost getting rid, well, they got rid, but the guy came back and won anyway, Hugo Chavez. And was very much in the right-wing Christian groups. And his goal was to evangelize Latin America. His goal was his dream was to make sure that every leader in Latin America was to become an evangelical Christian. And Shia, as you already know, worked for the Global Democratic Strategy and even worked with Abrahams in the post-apartheid South African reconstruction, and in fact supported the attack on Angola just after the country had gained its independence. And Shia also worked for the Freedom House, an organization with a long history of destabilizing other countries, including attempting to dislodge Hugo Chavez, as I said earlier, in Venezuela. And then later on she founded the Puebla Institute that was renamed the Freedom House to fight the growth of liberation theology in Latin America. According to former Contra leader Edward Chamorro, worked with the groups trying to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. So she was a very active woman. And then we have Tancredo and Brownback in the Senate. They pushed for hard Darfur Peace and Accountability Act, called for military intervention in Sudan. And Brownback was such a very interesting character when he was in Congress. Even disliked Latinos so much that he called them Nazis. And they were determined to undo everything that the great American Empire had done, and even called abortion a Holocaust, and compare stem cell research to Nazi medical experiments. And then we had Nazios. even believe that Bush's wonderful program in providing medical care, in providing billions of dollars to fight AIDS in Africa was a worthless cause. He said because Africans do not know how to tell time, that you give them all these antiviral drugs, they will not know the exact correct time to take the drugs. And lo and behold, thank God we did not listen to him, because PEPFAR is one of the most successful Bush administration policies in Africa, as we've seen the decline in HIV, AID crisis in East Africa and Southern Africa declined precipitously because of that program. So the people who run Bush's administration strategy for Africa employ the rhetoric of freedom and stability, but their policy witnessed an increasing military presence on the continent, the overthrow of a government which had finally brought peace to Somalia, and the establishment of alliances with authoritarian governments in Algeria, Chad, Morocco, and Tunisia. So our fight is not against authoritarian rule. We support them as long as they were in support of our causes. Only when the authoritarian ruler is against us, then we come after you. And then the Bush African allies. That's a caricature, it's a joke of Zenawi. They compared him to Stalin. And he was one of the brutal dictators in Ethiopian history. And as I said earlier, the strange thing is that he himself was tortured under the socialist or communist regime of the militia. And then we had the countries, these are just few examples. Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, Djibouti, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tunisia. Go back up. And then we know about the infamous president of Uganda, who brings other people to the special court where he himself was labeled a war criminal, spent many years in the war bushes to fight the government that was in power. But justice is what? He who wins, victory, or what do we call it now? Victory justice? There's a word for it, concept for it. And then we have the most puppetish of all of them, Mohammed Gedi of Somalia, Ali Mohammed Gedi of Somalia, with his bullhorn. He never went on radio or TV. That was how he was going to communicate with people. Well, he can do it in Baidoa, where you are running a country and you have no guts to even stay in the capital, the nation's capital, where the parliament, where the structures are. He brought his horn to Mogadishu, and they shot the crazy stuff out of the gun and they ran back to Baidoa. But he was such a tool that whenever he had to make a policy or whenever he had to even debate, he was constantly on the cell phone. During parliamentary sessions, people said you go outside to call Washington to get approval of what he was saying is right. And we shall see the debacle in Somalia resources, which we tend to deny that we have. And believe it or not, we even had a Tuareg who stormed Mali, where and still are our allies in the war on terrorism. Why? The Tuaregs had to prove that they too can fight Al-Qaeda. So when you hear this thing about Al-Qaeda and Tuareg collaboration, question it. How can people have been fighting for so many years, killing each other, all of a sudden, they are now brothers and sisters and they're fighting? There's more to the story than they are telling us. In the hunt for Al-Qaeda in the Sahara and beyond, it is reported the Tuaregs in Timbuktu, Mali were recruited to fight on another front in the Bush administration war on terrorism. American trained men. And even the guy who overthrew the government that called the French and the Americans to come help him was educated and trained in the United States. What a coincidence. So it is a very interesting scenario that some of us are finding very difficult to swallow. What did Obama do? Well, this guy